It has been more than 5 days since we all have been consumed by the Israel-Hamas war. National politics, approaching assembly elections, a domestic civil war, inflation, unemployment, all this can wait. Right now, all we need is to follow the horrors of the surprise attack on Israel by Hamas terrorists. And then, of course, Israel bombing the shit out of Gaza Strip. More importantly, we need to have an opinion on this conflict. I mean, do you really have a working brain if you don't take a hard position on Israel versus Palestine, whose side you are on and why? But the more we studied this issue, the more confused we got. In fact, after 2 mega episodes on our main Deshbhakt Hindi channel, totaling close to 50 minutes, we are now more confused than ever before. We have more unanswered questions. We have more doubts about how international politics and media is gamed. We have more disgust over the hypocrisy that surrounds all of us. Just putting out 10 unanswered questions here quickly on today's show. Questions that 9 p.m. news is not focusing on. Questions so that you can see why Israel-Palestine conflict is not really a black and white issue, rather 50 or 50,000 shades of grey. There is good reason why Israel and Palestine conflict is the most vexed geopolitical issue of all times, and it gets more complicated now. First and foremost, let's get this out of the way. Who's the real victim? There is always this desire to take sides, love and sympathy for the victim, disdain for the villain. Well, this is not a war movie and there is no happy ending, unfortunately, in this story. Depending on which side of the fence you want to sit on, you can always justify Jews settling in this part of the world, calling it their ancestral homeland, ousting Palestinians from their homes over the last 100 years. The Jews themselves, of course, escaping the horrors of the Holocaust, but sadly precipitating a similar brutality in Gaza and the West Bank. On the other hand, the Palestinians did elect Hamas into power. And even if Hamas does not represent all of the Palestinian movement, all of the Palestinian people, their brutality, especially the killing this time of close to 1,200 Israeli civilians in cold blood, has robbed the Palestinian movement of any moral high ground that they might have had till now. In fact, this war clearly shows that there is no hero, maybe no clear villain, but of course, a whole lot more victims. Millions and millions of helpless Palestinian citizens whose houses, whose lives are being constantly reduced to rubble by incessant Israeli pounding. Palestinian citizens now who are being denied food, water, medicines. They are the real victims. Second, perhaps the only thing that comes close to the shocking death toll that Hamas terrorists were able to inflict was the sheer audacity of this attack that seems to have caught everyone by surprise. Most of all, of course, the Israeli security apparatus. But the brutal Israeli bombing that has come after that is also no surprise. It was only to be expected. Then why did Hamas do what it did? Why did it invite death and destruction onto the Gaza Strip? Was this done at the behest of Iran, that is using Hamas as a tool, as a cover-up to get to Israel? Was it done to sabotage the normalization of relations between the Saudi government and Israel? Or was it done as a last-ditch attempt to make this issue international, this whole Palestinian issue, how Palestinians are on a daily basis facing the brutalities that Israelis are raining down on them? While the whole world has condemned the barbaric attack of Hamas, a lot more needs to be found out as to why Hamas did it, who made it possible, so that we can understand what is going to be the fallout of this terror attack. And third, did Mossad know? Perhaps the most controversial question. Conspiracy theorists are refusing to believe that Hamas had a total element of surprise. And looking at the evidence on the ground, either Mossad knew what was coming, allowed it to happen, or there has been a complete failure of the famed Israeli security apparatus. And it'll go down in history as the greatest failure ever. Why? Now look at the evidence at hand. 5,000 rockets built, stored, gathered, fired. But no warning of such an attack. Hamas overwhelmed Israel's most sophisticated Iron Dome defense shield also, and of course its iron shield of the barricading that it had. Mossad, on the other hand, $3 billion in funding, 7,000 people on its staff, previously has stopped much smaller attempts against Israel. Did not get wind of the worst massacre of all Israelis of all times. How? Also, virtually no IDF response in the first few hours. What, everybody was sleeping? The border defense systems failed to stop Hamas forces from breaking down the border fencing. They used bulldozers and created mayhem all over the border areas. It looks all too easy for a ragtag force from Gaza to do this against a nuclear-capable power that builds, by the way, some of the most sophisticated spying devices on the planet. Or maybe Hamas really had some very, very serious help from Iran, maybe even Russia. Number 4. Hamas has long been designated as a terror group. In fact, many Palestinian observers say that either you can support Hamas or the Palestinian case. You cannot do both. Hamas has managed to undo a lot of the global goodwill that the Palestinian cause used to have, especially under PLO, especially under leaders like Yasser Arafat. Hamas today is set to listen to more to their masters in Iran rather than their own people. They launch rockets from hospitals. They use their own people as human shields. Their leader is sitting, watching this destruction unfold from the safety in Qatar, while more than 1,000 of his brothers have perished in the last few days. So yes, like many of the people in the world who have followed this conflict, it is very much possible to condemn Hamas while still wishing that the people of Palestine are able to get their own land, are able to get self-determination, and also question the barbaric acts, question the kind of apartheid that Israel also has rained down on the people of Palestine. Coming to point number 5, and a point that has puzzled a lot of people in this conflict, a citizenry that is yet to wake up to the horrors unfolding in Manipur, the civil war that is brewing there for the past 5 months, was suddenly outraged and ready to take sides in the Israel-Palestine war. It took them 5 minutes. In fact, using their us versus them binary, sides were chosen in this war with utter clarity and speed. Maybe Nobel laureates will spend years studying the Middle East problem, but we are very, very quick. Many rushed actually to defend the Palestinian cause, and some of them, strangely enough, for reasons best known to them, actually tried to defend the terror action of Hamas, called them freedom fighters. On the other side of the fence were staunch Israeli supporters who wanted the Jewish state to teach them a lesson that they would never forget, never mind the human cost involved. It's rare to see our nation to be so aware, so glued to the news, so riled up, even on domestic matters. Even as they consumed this war porn, there were gory images coming from Bihar, for example, where an accident victim's body was thrown over into a canal by the police themselves. A cookie fighter's body burnt out in the open in Manipur. The focus on the Middle East, the focus on the Iran-Hamas war has been unshakable and very divisive for India. I mean, very much like a India-Pakistan match, despite the fact that even our own government has played a very delicate balancing game between Israel and the Palestinian cause. Point number 6, how many more lives are going to be lost? We've seen many bombings, by the way, in the past of Iraq, of Afghanistan, of Syria. They hardly ever solve anything in the long term, often give rise to new issues. Right now, as the world watches, Israel is bombing Gaza into the Stone Ages. Not that it wasn't far from the Stone Ages anyways, but what exactly is this bombing going to achieve? Are hostages going to be returned? Are Hamas terrorists going to be eliminated? Or is this just blind rage that is flowing out at this point of time? And for how long? The Israeli defense minister branded them as human animals, and Gaza Strip has been blocked off water, food, electricity supply for an indefinite period. While the killing of 1,200 Israelis is horrendous, there is no defense for it, and Israel has every right on earth to hunt down Hamas terrorists. But depriving 2 million Palestinians of basics as food and water, is that correct? Now, Benjamin Netanyahu would clearly need to show action at this point of time, especially because the far-right elements in his coalition right now are asking for blood. And the pattern we've seen before: aerial bombing, then a ground assault. If a ground assault happens again, it's going to be difficult for the Israeli military and devastating for Palestinian civilians. Gaza is amongst the most densely populated places on earth, and the last major Israeli ground incursion into Gaza happened in 2014, lasted for about 2 weeks, resulted in the death of 66 Israeli soldiers, 6 Israeli civilians, and over 2,000 Palestinians, mostly civilians, a quarter of whom were children. So once again, this conflict brings us to the same old point. How long is the UN going to sit like a puppet of the big powers? The US, the UK, host of Western nations fully backing Israel. There seems to be no calibration at this point of time as to Israel's response to this terror attack. When India, for example, was hit in places like Uri, we responded. We responded with surgical strikes at specific targets in Pakistan to send out a clear message. Our restraint while responding was internationally appreciated. Given how good Israel's Mossad and other agencies are, they could have hit at the Hamas leadership, reduced Hamas's capabilities. But right now, a lot of it that is happening is just shooting in the dark. And there is really no one to stop it because Israel has the moral higher ground at this point of time. It has the sympathy of the world. It has the global support. But for how long? How long will the UN watch Palestinians take the short end of the stick? How many more of their children will have to die before someone listens to their side of the story as well? And when we are talking about stories, will fake news narrative win the war this time? Because along with guns and bombs, there has been a lot of keyboards that have really been put into action over the last few days, all in an attempt to build a narrative around this war. Hamas using slick training videos to show how capable it was, how it breached the Iron Wall, the Iron Dome. These videos are then used to, win the narrative and recruit new members. Israel on its own side is showing the barbarism of how Hamas attacked unarmed, innocent civilians. There is, of course, a very fertile ground at this point of time to allow for fake news to spread like wildfire. Like 40 Israeli children being beheaded by the Hamas, stomachs of pregnant women being slit and children being ripped out, and much, much, much worse. How low can we sink? In a war that has already had enough horror stories and images, we are planting more to get the upper hand. Will this lead to more freedom to attack and counterattack? So big is this problem at this point of time that the European Union has written to Elon Musk regarding the kind and the volume of the misinformation that is floating around on Twitter or X. So point number 9, what happens to Benjamin Netanyahu? A lot of this bloodshed right now is being driven by anger, by fear, by political complications. Netanyahu is facing the crisis of his lifetime. There is no question about that, at least. This massive security failure happened under his government. 1,200 Israelis died under his watch, and the far right now is screaming. They are, of course, asking for his head as well. But right now, political observers in Israel are writing the political obituary of Benjamin Netanyahu. Without pressure on his head, Netanyahu may have gone for a more calibrated approach, more targeted attack on Hamas, maybe attack its leadership. But right now, with limited room to move, he really needs to show action and fast action. And this means a lot more blood would be spilled, a lot more innocent lives would be lost. Even after that, even if Hamas is 100% liquidated, Netanyahu will have to face a very hostile political future. But now, for now, he's hoping that his wartime unity government holds and that he at least is able to give back a befitting reply to the terror attack that happened under his watch. And finally, point number 10, are we looking at a wider war? Are we looking at the Middle East going up in flames? Israel right now will have to handle a lot more than just internal politics or just Hamas. There is a real threat that others may join the war at this point of time, especially if bombings in Gaza go on for an indefinite period of time. Hezbollah already appears to be testing Israel's limits in the area, firing missiles and artillery at the Golan Heights. Hamas also has been trying to make the West Bank erupt with violence. Speaking of a third intifada, USA in the meantime is sending more ammunition to Israel and warships into the region so that other regional powers don't get any ideas of opening other fronts against Israel. But retaliation against Israelis, by the way, may come in other forms, including more terror attacks abroad. So that can't be ruled out also. So basically, the point is there are so many unanswered questions. There are so many moving parts. There are so many uncertainties in this. And yet we are being told to take a stand. We are apparently understanding this complicated Middle East situation only because us versus them logic is being put in a story where it is actually not about us versus them. So if you really need to take a stand, if you really need to put a hashtag, then take a stand for all the victims right now who are being bombarded, all the fathers who are being forced to carry the dead body of their daughters, all the children who have died on both sides, whether be it Palestinians or whether be it Israelis. Take a stand against the hypocrisy of the Western media that seems to be waking up only as far as Israel is concerned, but not wakes up when similar atrocities are happening as far as the Palestinians are also concerned. This was just a small attempt. I don't know whether this is going to make an impact or not. This whole initiative, not the 9 p.m. news, is also a very small attempt to really focus on issues and questions that are not dealt at 9 p.m. So not showing you really breaking war visuals here, just asking some questions. But if you really like the initiative that we have started here, do subscribe, do share this video. We'll try to do better. We'll try to do more. How are we doing? Let us know in the comments.